We will do a small change of plans now, and we will continue with the presentation of Tina Bregant. So, Tina, if you're ready, you can join us and start sharing your presentation. So Tina is a Slovenian pediatrician, pediatrist, researcher, and also a university lecturer. She did her PhD in child neurology in 2013. And in addition to her clinical and research work, she is an author of the book An Exciting Journey Through the Developing Brain, which combines scientific insights into neuroscience with useful advice for parents and educators. And today she will do the presentation on developing brain shaped by nature and nurture and digital imprint. So Tina, you can start.
Yes, thank you. Do you see me? Because my screen shares the admin screen. Okay, now you can see me.
We can see you.
And now I'm going to share mine as well. Okay. Okay. I think I cannot show you the whole, so you will see a part of it. So thank you for the introduction. So I'm the pediatrician neuroscientist, and today's topic is the developing brain, how it is shaped by nature and nurture in the time of Digicen. Why? I think that in today's time, where people are usually trying to deny biology, actually we need to be reminded that nature and nurture do shape our brains. There is, of course, this genetic blueprint where the single gene change, the mutation, can actually change the brain development substantially. And we, with today's knowledge, we know that the single nucleotide polymorphism, they influence our behavior because they influence how open we are, how conscientious we are. So this all shapes us genetically. But of course, there is also the environmental influence, which is shaping the neural pathways. So either you have the environment which is stimulating, which we are all aware of. Of course, there is the influence of secure attachments, the influence of proper nutrition, of course, with the environmental toxin, especially because of the ecology, and with all the problems we have with our environment and our planet. And of course, today's knowledge knows that in children we need to encourage play. However, in English we have a distinction between play and game, playing and gaming, while in Slovenian language we don't know the difference. So in Slovenian mental environment, this is a huge handicap for Slovenians, because we don't recognize the difference between game and play. Now, when we are talking about the mental health disorders and mental health problems, we know that these problems are escalating. And here in these graphs, you can see that all the problems are on the rise, and not only after COVID, which was frequently heard in Slovenian environment, but actually prior to this. And this blue line is actually referring to obesity, because the obesity is not just the problem of nutrition, it's also the problem connected with the way how we function, also with our mental fitness, let's say. Here are the substance abuses. You can see that the classical abuses with alcohol and nicotine are going down, while, for example, marijuana, it stays quite high. Of course, here we don't have the digital and screen media yet, but probably we need to start to draw them on the graph. So what are the contributing factors which increase the mental health problems in children and young adults? Of course, there is trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and of course, all those burdens like financial burdens, stress. However, we are aware that today the academic and career stress, yes, it's important. However, there is always this genetic susceptibility to those influences. And very interesting that despite the fact that the mental health diseases actually increased from 90s to 2016 by 2 to 3 times, when we incorporate the use of the screen time and adolescent use of smartphones and social media, this showed only weak or no association with decreased mental well-being or increased mental health diseases. So obviously there is something going on in addition to the screen time. I think that we all are aware that today's generations, they are reporting that their mental health is not well. They are least likely to report excellent or very good mental health. You can see this on that graph. And you can also see how they are feeling stressed. And you can see they report stress considering almost everything you can think of in the society, from mass shootings to rise in suicide rate, to climate change anxiety and global warming anxiety, to other harassment, sexual harassment and assault reports. So these generations are really not as healthy as they should be in the time of prosperity. Of course, stress was always present. However, maybe you can see the last line, which is completely politically incorrect, but I stated it here because I think that we need to talk about this. If we just ignore it, it's not going to bring us any solutions. So with medical and also societal advancement, we are not living anymore to the maxima the society lived before. So the survival of the fittest is obviously not the case anymore. We have less children, and those children we have, they have more problems. Because of the advancement, we have more premature babies, almost 10% of all population. They do have syndromes, they do survive it. And actually one could be politically completely incorrect and say that we are maybe fewer and sicker. And this contributes to the resilience, which I will be talking about later on. But I want us to think about the consequences of the society we live today. So what are the major differences between children and adolescents? Adolescents, they do think more logically, abstractly, and they do understand the issues that aren't always simple. They are able to pick up more other people's emotional cues. They can solve complex problems in a logical way, and they are able to see the problems from different perspectives. While the children, they actually don't have those abilities just as developed as the adolescents. So there is the clear connection between body and the brain, and if we look at the brain scans from the neonate, for example, of 1 week old to 3 months and then to 10 years, what do you see? We see that actually this brain is smaller. This is obvious, right? So it's smaller, but it's also darker. Why it is darker? Because this white matter, it's actually the myelin. It's the myelinization. It's the fatty tissue that goes around the axons and enables that the electricity goes unidirectionally and that it is fast processing. So the myelinization in the neonate, in babies, it's just starting. So smaller and less myelinated, and also you can see that it's not just as advanced, so the cortex is just not as indented as later on. So these major changes from volume, where actually the whole volume grows, but also cortical gray matter. The gray matter is the area where the neurons, the bodies of neurons have their site. So this cortical gray matter, it grows in the first years, but then during the adolescence, it thins, so we call this cortical thinning. The white matter increases with this process of myelinization. Also, the volumes of, for example, the liquor that goes around or in the ventricles, this also goes up. So this volume increases as well. So lateral ventricles, corpus callosum, which is the main connection between both hemispheres, the basal ganglia, the amygdala, which is the center for fear, as well as the hippocampus, the center for the memory, they all increase in volume. So the total brain volume actually reaches the adult size already by school age, while those other areas, they still mature. And the last to mature are, for example, the frontal lobes and the cortex, and also the connections. So we have different stages that children, adolescents reach till the adulthood, and the brain is adult, completely formed in their 20s when they are 25 or something. So also the brain metabolism changes. So it's very active during first years, but then during the childhood, it increases its metabolism. But then in the adolescence, this falls down to the adult level. Now, it's interesting when we are talking about the screens and we are talking about the COVID and we are talking about the lockdown effect. Actually, there are studies now which showed that adolescent brain structures suggest accelerated maturation during COVID, and this was more pronounced in females than in males. So this is interesting change, which we didn't expect, but this is what we observed during studies. So if I actually sum up, in the brain areas, we can describe three systems which undergo severe changes also during adolescence. And one is this gray matter, then is the white matter with myelinization. And there are, of course, the system of reward, which are extremely important when talking about screens and about the loot box systems, which are classical dopamine hijack systems. So they undergo severe changes during adolescence. So actually this reward system changes with puberty extensively. And it changes also in the way how the neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and GABA systems are changing to the adult forms. These systems are actually the ones which drive aggression, passion, as well as sex drive. They actually enable us to value the peer connections more, which is what we see in adolescents, who actually now value their peers more than their family. And actually, they enable us to master certain things and to actually be able to process more data than we were able to process when we were younger. When we introduce the digital media according to all those brain changes, you can see that the digital media were developed by really smart people and corporation, and they actually increase, they are built to empower peers, to build social connections. They are built in that way that they show us novelty and they give us the sense of adventure. They seem to offer us various choices. They are really on the reach immediately, here and now. They can even be individualized. They are actually not very expensive if we fail on doing something. And they are really, nowadays, they can be seen as the virtual arena for drivers of aggression and sex, which is, I think, quite important to be aware of. So what about the neuroscience? Well, maybe you have heard about this ABCD study. this study is still under the research, but you can access some recent data, some recent news. So I highly recommend this. This is their web page. So actually they're studying a little bit less than 12,000 children aged from 9 to 10 years when they joined the study, and they are going to study them for 10 years. So it's a huge data which show us already some preliminary results. What are the preliminary results considering screen use? We now know that actually the youth use screens more now than they did before. And actually the 12 to 13 years old, you can see that they use them a lot. They use them almost 8 hours per day, which is extremely a lot. When they play video games or gaming, you can see that we link this to actually increased ability of problem solving, which is probably fine. They are more flexible in thinking, and they are able even to recall facts faster, and they do have more skills. However, if they use social media, they have decreased ability of problem solving. And of course, if they use screens, they do report more sleep problems. They do report more ADHD. They tend to have lower grades in school. And they even have lower number of closer friends, which, of course, because they spend so much time on screens. Now, why do some children and adolescents, why do they like to play this? And how is this connected to the psychopathology? Well, now this is the system of IPACE, which is the acronym for Interaction of Person, Affect, Cognition, Execution Model. And it shows that the results show that psychopathology, which is associated with the development of gaming disorder among adolescents, it's actually showing the already existing mental health issues, particularly if they have some propensity to develop later on depression, anxiety, social problems, and ADHD. So whenever you are addressing those problems, you are already addressing the gaming disorder, which is, I think, important because some children do profit from screen use, while the others will develop severe psychopathology and severe gaming disorder, which is a problem also to the public health. So you need to take this into consideration, that there are more vulnerable people who will be vulnerable to other mental health problems, including, and as a consequence, also the problem with gaming disorder. We are all aware of this biopsychosocial model, so I will not repeat that. However, we need to be remembered that maybe all these problems we are reporting are more connected, not so much to the screens, but maybe to the relationships we build in the families, in the society, as well as connected to our dopamine culture. Loot box is actually a classical dopamine hijacker. So whenever you have this loot boxes system, it has everything that hijacks our nucleus accumbens and the dopamine reward system, because it has the element of surprise, the element of randomness, the element of excitement, fun, and prize. So whenever you are doing something connected to that, actually your nucleus accumbens, which is a small reward nucleus inside your brain, actually it releases additional dopamine. It's the system which is involved in all the addictions, including the food addiction connected to it can be connected to the obesity. So actually this system is hijacked also by those games. And those who develop those games, those who invent loot boxes, they are very well aware of those neuroscientific mechanisms behind that. So actually your brain, your neuromatrix, it changes in the short term, but also on the long term. Of course, there are the mechanisms, if you remember the first slide. So nature and nurture, of course, the genes, but also the epigenetic changes connected to the sensitive period effect. So the younger you are, the more you are under influence for certain development. So when you are younger, you are probably not exposed to the screens as much as the adolescent. However, your intrinsic propensity and your intrinsic way how you trust other people, how you build social relationship, how you develop your language abilities, this will all influence your propensity to develop later on also addictive behavior. So what are the factors which actually protect you from that? They are so-called resilience factors. And those resilience factors are positive coping style, optimism, and social support, which I think is very interesting. And the risk factors are urbanicity, migration, poverty, low social status, and social exclusion. It's actually nothing new. We all knew that before. However, we seemed to ignore those basic biological facts and forgot it. So whenever we ask ourselves, what do we want for adolescents? Of course, we want them to be happy, but is it realistic to live without stress? Is it realistic to live without screens? What about life? Is life maybe a gamble? Sometimes I ask myself whether the God likes to throw a dice because this system is so powerful in our brain, and those who are trading, they are very well aware of that, and that's why they use those mechanisms. And of course, what environment do we create? And that's why also the legislation system is very important. So I am very grateful for the talk we heard before. Actually, also, when you want to be successful, actually, success never happens without stress. So actually, you need to be resilient, despite the fact that life is inevitably stressful to everyone. So it doesn't spare anyone. And everybody is, at one point in their life, it's exposed to some of the trauma, the bigger or the lesser trauma. But why am I showing this? Because I want us to remember that actually it's good to live in the middle. So why? Because maybe we should build more on mental resilience, because there are people who are more vulnerable. We have heard that even for those gaming disorder, they are more vulnerable to other mental health problems as well. However, as a society, probably we should build more on resilience. So there are some practical advice. Because it is important how teenagers spend their time. This is crucial for their brain development. So what do they do in free time? What are their risky behaviors? What are their relationships, not only to peers, but also to parents and family? Extremely important. And there are some good practices they can do. It's like meditation, to get enough physical activity, not only sports, but physical activity, to have good sleep. If they spend a lot of time on screens, they lose good sleep. Altruism, social connections. And of course, there is very simple way of writing down the gratitude exercise. It's important for them to be grateful. So not just to exert anxiety and what is wrong with the world, but also to express gratitude for their family, for their environment, wherever they live. I think that we have forgotten about this, to have a little bit of humility in front of life. Adults, we as the adults, we are the one who can encourage positive behavior and promote good thinking skills. Also, we are the ones who help to develop them healthy lifestyles, including the sleep hygiene, and be supportive and promote connectivity. it's really important who are we and how can we help. So it's important to be authentic, to be able to build relationships ourselves, not just to expect this from the adolescents, to encourage empathy, to emphasize the immediate and long-term consequence of actions, because for the adolescents, this is sometimes hard to grasp. We try not to be too complicated and try to match our language level to the level of patients. And we can help them develop decision-making and problem-solving skills. So this is also important, and to be a good role model and don't judge. To be able to discuss, not judge, encourage healthy lifestyle. This always helps to our brain development. Sometimes people forget it, but it's really important. It's more important than eating some magical pills, or we don't have silver bullet, but we have some good lifestyle advices which can help us to develop better working brain, apart, of course, of genetics, which we cannot influence. So encourage healthy lifestyle, sleep, food, good food, no problem. Just do tell the doctor. So talk, evaluate, diet, develop healthier habits, extremely important. Of course, be open-minded, non-judgmental. Also, there are some sexually transmitted diseases. It's very good to have open relationships, because if we don't know everything, we cannot actually influence that. Talk about skin, tattoos, piercing, acne, teen angst versus depression is also important. I know that this maybe sounds a little bit too simple to be true, but the truth is that first we need to start from the basics. And in nowadays times, in the so-called digital era, sometimes it's important to go back to the foundations. And the foundations seem to be simple, but they are not, because children now, they spend a lot of time in their schools. They start early, they come home late, parents are working late, and actually we are absent from each other's connections. And this is something that we didn't expect 100 years ago. Also, we are the first generations who sleep less. So we are chronically deprived of sleep. So despite the fact that this is simple, it's not so simple to put it in the real life. I would like to remind us that brain is an adaptive tool. It's plastic, it's moldable, it's able to change the environment, but it's also able to change itself. And to conclude, I would like to remind us that most happy are not those who have the most, but those who make the most out of what they have. Hereby I stop, and I am happy to take the questions.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. I see that there are currently no questions in the chat, so maybe to take a moment, you can ask still. You can write down a question in the chat.
Lahko tudi v slovenščini, ne?
Ja.
Ker vidim, da jih je kar nekaj. Jaz sem hotela predvsem pokazati, no, tako še v slovenščini en tak hiter povzetek, da pravzaprav v tej dopaminski kulturi naši možgani in te računalniške strategije, igrice, zasloni in vse ti softverska oprema, ta je narejena iz strani korporacij, iz strani ljudi, ki zelo dobro poznajo neuromarketing. In oni točno vejo, kako v bistvu ugrabijo naše možgane, naše nukleonse, akumbense, in iz tega se mi zelo težko izvijemo. Tudi če imamo dobre temelje. Če imamo dobre temelje, nam bo to lažje. Ampak dobri temelji so pa nekaj, kar je pa v naši družbi včasih težko zagotoviti. Dovolj spanja, dobra prehrana, dobri odnosi.
We have one question here, sorry to interrupt, but it's how can teachers support children and adolescents with this basic that you mentioned at the end? So these basics that you mentioned at the end.
Ja, a v slovenščini, mislim, da je
Yeah, maybe you can just answer in English, because So
Yeah, I
we
can.
understand.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can.
thank you.
Actually, it's what I already listed. So actually the teacher, if the teacher is authentic, if the teacher is a good role model, if the teacher is not judgmental, if he doesn't judges, but listens, and it's open and creates an open but safe space for the adolescents, then maybe the teacher is the only one who actually actively listens to the adolescent, because adolescents sometimes doesn't want to get connected back to their parents. They want to open out, and in the adolescence that actually the peers are seem to be more important. So the teacher is the one who can spend quite some times with adolescent and can create this safe space. So the role of teacher is extremely important, because this can be also not only as a mentor for the area that the adolescent is interested in, because usually children don't become what their parents are by the profession, but sometimes it's the teacher who they admire, that the adolescents choose the profession of that teacher. So if the teacher, I don't know, if the one who is the role model is the teacher of biology, then sometimes the student goes into biology field, not, for example, something else that their parents are by profession. So I think that teachers are extremely important. Also, the food in the secondary school, very important. So actually our schools, not only in the grammar school, but also in the secondary school, it is important that they are able to have their lunch there, and that their lunch is not a sandwich, but it's a soup and salad and the meat. So it's the wholesome lunch package. So all those simple things are not so simple as they seem at the first sight.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there are no more questions, so thank you for your answer and for your presentation.